Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. It's your one-stop shop to take stock of all the progress on the political and literal battlefields. And this week, my friends, it extends all the way to Russian territory. But before we get there, let's go ahead and start off with our top stories. The General Staff of Ukraine's armed forces says Russia has lost more than 587,000 troops since the beginning of its full-scale invasion of the country back in February of 2022.
According to Ukraine's military, Moscow has lost more than 8,400 tanks, 16,300 armoured fighting vehicles, nearly 16,500 artillery systems, 1,100 multiple launch rocket systems, 900 air defence systems, 366 airplanes, 327 helicopters, 28 ships and boats, and 1 submarine. Ukraine reports that Russian forces suffered more than 1,000 casualties in one day alone this week.
The International Atomic Energy Agency is concerned that fires near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is still under Russian control, could pose a threat to its external power supply.
Fires have been observed near the Zaporizhzhia plant and its surrounding areas, including one under overhead power cables supplying the plant's power. While power lines have not yet been shut down, the International Atomic Energy Agency has highlighted the vulnerability of the site's external power supply, particularly as extreme summer heat continues. In July, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution demanding Moscow's troops withdraw from the facility and restore full control of the plant to Ukraine.
Ukraine's head of military intelligence, Kyiv Post, told Forbes Ukraine that liberating Crimea would be easier than retaking the Donbass because of the peninsula's strategic features.
Over the past 2 years, Ukraine has launched a number of strikes on military and naval targets in Crimea. Russian forces have occupied part of the eastern Donbass region and Crimea since 2014. Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Bohdan, said while the Donbass region has a 1,000-kilometre front line, Crimea has just 2 key entry points, the Kerch Bridge and the narrow land isthmus of Perikop, making the area easier to isolate.
Ukrainian intelligence officials say that the main thrust of Russia's current offensive should wind up within the next 1.5 to 2 months.
Russia launched its offensive in the northern part of the Kharkiv region in May, frequently targeting the city of Kharkiv, but this has now largely slowed down. The operation was seen by many experts as an attempt to distract and stretch Ukrainian forces. At the same time, Moscow's troops have also continued to seize villages in the Donetsk region, pushing towards the town of Chasiv Yar and Pokrovsk. These are said to be Russia's main objectives.
Bulgaria's cabinet has approved the use of its military to train Ukrainian soldiers under NATO's Security Assistance and Training for Ukraine program.
The training scheme was established during July's NATO summit in Washington. The initiative coordinates the provision of military hardware and training to Ukraine by partners. It aims to support the transformation of Ukraine's defence and security forces, aligning them with NATO's. According to the Euroactiv news site, Sofia was one of Ukraine's largest non-public arms suppliers at the end of 2022.
And now it's time to look at the war in Ukraine through a journalist's lens. And with us is our correspondent, Oz Chatterjee, who is currently in Kyiv. Hello, Oz. So we see another horrible Russian attack on civilians, this time in Konstantinivka. Russians using artillery, what it seems, on a supermarket. There are many casualties. What can you tell us about this latest attack on these Ukrainian civilians?
Well, it was initially reported as an artillery strike, but the authorities have revised that now, saying it was a Kinzhal 38 cruise missile fired by Russia that targeted a supermarket in Konstantinivka. That's in Donetsk, in the east of Ukraine. And we know so far that at least 14 people have been killed and at least 43 people have been injured in the strike. Now, Kyiv has reacted strongly to this with statements from Zelensky and others condemning this, with Zelensky saying Russia will be held responsible for this terror. But once again, it's another brutal attack targeting civilians in a shopping center. This has become a repeated pattern of Russia, particularly in the east of Ukraine and in Kharkiv, to target shopping centers that they know civilians are going to be there, women, children, the softest of soft targets. No military strategic value whatsoever in targeting these. They are specifically designed to terrorize the Ukrainian population. So another dark day here in Ukraine as they advance in places like Kursk in Russia. Russia's responding by brutalizing Ukrainian civilians once again.
Yeah, taking revenge on civilians always seems to be the method. Oz Chatterjee reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you very much. After all that the city of Kherson has been through, its residents are now facing constant Russian aerial attacks, which residents there are calling torture. In recent months, drone attacks targeting civilians have been more frequent than ever. Some are even calling it a Russian safari on Kherson's residents.
The residents of Kherson are faced with a living nightmare. Constant bombing, shelling, missile and drone strikes. The latter is becoming an increasing problem.
Drones have been raining down on us all day, flying, buzzing. They're flying like flies. We have no strength. We have forgotten the last time we had slept well. I have a dog on sedatives. The dog was wounded and the house was damaged. In our family, 5 houses have already been destroyed. 5 houses.
There are reports from that area saying that Russian drones are hunting down civilians to drop explosives on them. It's estimated that 50 people have been killed by targeted drone attacks in the last 2 months in Kherson alone. The critical infrastructure and local buildings are also taking a hit. The yard belonging to local resident Vyacheslav is full of rubble. Windows are broken. The repairs will not be cheap, but luckily no one in his family was hurt in the attack.
No one was injured. My wife was at work. This is all that's left of the summer kitchen. Now we're dismantling it all. The refrigerator too. We're taking it all out. We put everything in a pile because there's no place to take it out.
The city of Kherson was captured by Russia in the first days of the full-scale invasion. The Kremlin officially recognizes Kherson as part of Russia since September 2022, even though the annexation is not internationally recognized. In November of that same year, the Ukrainians won back control over the city. In June 2023, Kherson was flooded after an explosion damaged the Kakhovka Dam. Now the residents of the city are living under constant fear of being attacked from the sky.
And now joining me here on Ukraine This Week with exclusive footage and reporting is my guest, Zarina Zabrisky. She's a Ukraine-based American journalist. Hello, Zarina, and thank you very much for joining us on Ukraine This Week.
Hi, Don. It's my pleasure. Good to see you.
Now, you've been following this story for quite a bit of time now, these horrible attacks, Russian soldiers deliberately targeting civilians in the city of Kherson. You've been based there for a long time. Tell my audience, our audience, about the situation in Kherson and what the residents are currently facing with this latest threat.
Yes, Don, this is a new development. I was not myself familiar with it, even though I've been working in Kherson on and off for 2 years, and I was based here, living here for 6 months. I took a break reporting from the other parts of Ukraine. I was in Sumy and Chernihiv, and then in Odessa, and then I returned back, and I find out that there's a new weapon, the new terrible strategy that is being used on the residents of Kherson. The locals called it skid, which literally means the drop of explosives from the drones. And ever since I started to report on it, which has been by now 2.5 weeks, almost 3 weeks, I watch it growing exponentially, every day we have more and more attacks. Just today, and it's not the end of the day yet, we had 20 attacks just registered. Not all of these attacks are reported. It's pretty impossible to record or film it, although I did manage to obtain an exclusive video that we will be able to share on your show.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. Let's run that video in just a second here. We have two videos to show. First one is actually exclusive footage of a drone chasing a civilian. Let's go ahead and run that.
So here, as you could see, a civilian who was just taking garbage out to the end of the lane was attacked, chased by a Russian FPV drone. They're called first-person view drones. They are usually led by another type of drone called Mavic. It's a surveillance drone that has a good camera. So, and it's important here, the operator of the Mavic drone can see the target from across the river. The Russian military are positioned across the Dnieper River from the city of Kherson. It is very close, in some places less than 1 kilometer. And that's why the drones are capable of penetrating the airspace above Kherson city and the suburbs. And so this Mavic drone sees very well the people they are targeting. They can tell this is not a military target. These Mavic drones can summon, so to say, an FPV drone, which then attacks the target. And they usually either drop the explosives or they're called kamikaze drones for a reason. They plummet down and explode, taking their own life, so to say, with their targets. So that's what we see on this footage, which was taken by the CCTV camera on the building of one of the people I have interviewed. Those people were also targeted by the drone, but also managed to survive. And this is becoming more and more common. At this point, I have to say that pretty much everyone I speak to, Dawn, has been either chased by a drone or had to hide from a drone, or at least saw a drone above them. And I have to say that so did I.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it must be terrifying. In a lot of instances, I would imagine that you can't hear them. You can't hear them probably in many cases until they're on their final path, especially in the case of those FPV drones. So what is it doing to the civilian life of the city? I mean, how are civilians reacting to this all-out attack on normal, everyday life in Kherson?
Well, a couple of things here. First of all, the audio quality of life. Yes, you can hear them. You hear them as a giant, monstrous bumblebee that is following you. Other people have described it as a motorcycle far away, or a drill, electric drill, a lawnmower. It's a very unpleasant sound, and the problem is that you hear it at the very last moment, so there's very little time left to hide. As for the drone attacks interfering with the normal life in Kherson, that would be a stretch, because the life, everyday life in Kherson stopped being normal about on the 24th of February 2022, followed 9 months of occupation, and then right at the liberation, which was the beginning of November, 11th of November specifically, of 2022, the Russians who relocated, like I said, on the other side of the Dnieper River, started to target the city and the suburbs and the villages and the liberated part of the region convention with artillery, mortar, tanks, pretty much anything, because they're so close that they can reach Kherson. And drone attacks are not the only attacks that people are experiencing. This is what's happening mainly during the day. At night, Khersonians are being targeted by artillery fire and by multi-launch rocket systems, GRADs. And this is very loud, very disturbing, most likely meant to keep people awake at night, because the lack of sleep leads to further demoralization. And during the day, artillery fire may continue, and then on top of it, there are skids or the drone drops. So as you can imagine, the morale is not soaring, I would say, although the people of Kherson are so strong and also so used to these daily trials that they take it in good spirit. I mean, there are jokes about drones. People still manage to make it to multiple activities, art classes, gyms are open. I went to report from a boxing gym where the whole group was anywhere from 5-year-old to 70-year-old, and everybody was training. And yes, people have to hide under trees to make it there, wherever they are heading, be it a grocery store or a gym or their office, but the life does continue.
You also, you've conducted tons of interviews with many of the Kherson residents, and we have some of that footage that you gave us. What are we about to see? Can you give us some kind of introduction to what it is we're about to see?
Right. I made it a point, Dawn, to interview as many people as I possibly can. So hopefully this is on record, because what we see here are grave war crimes. The Geneva Convention, the addendum to Geneva Convention, and the Rome Statute all define war crimes as deliberate targeting of civilians. And this is what we have here, because the drone operators, like I said, could see their targets. And therefore, I've been interviewing pretty much anyone I see. And at this point, pretty much everyone was either injured or targeted, or knows someone who was injured or killed by a Russian drone. And it's not easy to conduct interviews because at this point, very few cars are daring to go certain places, especially coastal areas. It's not safe to walk around in the open, and people are not safe and don't feel comfortable being interviewed outside. So you have to locate people, you have to find a safe place, and oftentimes people I interview shouted, go away, because they will come for you. It is becoming more and more challenging to do journalistic work in Kherson, but it still needs to be done, and you could see what these people have to say.
You've talked to many of these residents. Are there primarily more elderly people that are staying behind in Kherson, or is it really a mix of young and old? What does the civilian makeup of the city now look like?
Right, great question. We remember that before the war, we spoke about it before on your show, Kherson was almost 400,000 people. The population decreased significantly. Right now it's hard to tell. They give us a number of about 60,000, but it fluctuates. Right now more and more people evacuate. And it's really a mix. Of course, a lot of families have left. People who are staying are those who have hard time living for multiple reasons, including financial. There are lack of jobs. They don't have enough means to move. And financially, life in Kherson is difficult right now. Most businesses are closed. And there are no jobs, like I said, no sources of income. Pensioners do receive their pension, but people, of pre-retirement age have hard time paying their daily cost of living. Yet there's still quite a lot of younger population. Some people work remote jobs. There's still programmers in the city, all sort of people really, and there are still families with kids, and it is very upsetting to know that teenagers are being targeted. 2 weeks ago, there were two 16-year-old girls that were attacked by a Russian drone. Yesterday, there was a child, I believe, what would be 2008, a child like younger than 18, injured by an attack like that. But a lot of these people are elderly, often elderly women.
So how have the civilians reacted to this this new type of attack that is being unleashed upon them, these drones? Does it change how they function on a day-to-day basis? Or is the civilian population aware of the problem?
Oh, yes, everybody is very aware. It's hard not to be aware because they are simply here. They have physical presence. For instance, just to give you an example, yesterday I was heading for an interview, and usually I walk, but the drone situation was so bad that I decided to take a cab, and the driver of the taxi cab had an injury that he sustained a day before, and he's back to work. And when I arrived, to the writer and artist I was interviewing, she told me that she was chased by 5 drones when she was going to a church on Sunday. And after that, I headed to my yoga studio where I go to keep my morale high. And there, 2 people told me that they were chased by the drone, and another person saw a drone her in the sky. So yes, people know about it very well. They take my co-worker, producer of our film, who helps us quite a bit and volunteers a lot in the city of Kherson, has been attacked 3 times yesterday. His car was attacked 3 times, and this morning his garage again suffered from the drops of explosives from the drone. So it's omnipresent, but people, like I said, have strong spirit here. They are hoping that the Ukrainian military will develop the way to protect them, and we can talk about that too. What are the ways to defend Kherson from such attacks?
Well, right, you hear about drone jammers and things of this nature. Ukraine has been kind of reluctant to do this in mass because they're operating their own drones. But what can be done to prevent these attacks?
It is a very difficult situation, and I spoke to a few people, including the spokesperson for Kherson military administration, who confirmed that there are electronic warfare units called RAB here. They're not enough. The administration probably needs to build it up. It requires money, about $300,000 estimate. But that's not the only issue. They are bringing the RABs, the electronic warfare units. But as one of the experts explained to me, this is a constant chase. It's somewhat of a game because the drones are changing the frequency, then the electronic warfare units are changing their frequency range accordingly, and then the next week the frequency is changed again, and it's going on and on and on, and like several people, several engineers who are trying to work on the solution told me that there will be very difficult to find a lasting solution because it's an ongoing process. It's the evolving technology that we're dealing with here.
You said earlier that that you've been following this for about 2.5 weeks. When did you notice that this was indeed a thing, a tactic that is being freshly employed by the Russians? What are the numbers? I mean, how many attacks have you seen over these past 2.5 weeks there?
Right, like I said, they are increasing. When I arrived, I've counted about 3 to 4 daily, and then with every day the numbers were raising and going up and up and up. And I spoke and I speak on a daily basis with the authorities in charge, and I get the numbers. So just today we had 20 confirmed drone drops. Yesterday about the same number. As of today, the number I got, but the day is not over, so the numbers probably will change and grow. But we had 8 injured on August 8th. There were 12 injured and 1 killed by the drones only. We're not talking about artillery. That's a different roster. And there are a lot of victims. There are a lot of injured and killed artillery fire and by MLRS systems as well. Yesterday, I thought, and I was listening and I heard a drop because it's a very distinct sound. You can tell it from the artillery fire. And I found a safe place and started to count. And all in all, I counted up to 12. And then I lost count. But that was within an hour.
I also wanted to ask you, because recently you were in the Sumy region and you were on the border there, exactly where the latest Ukrainian offensive launched into the Kursk region is currently going on. What did you see when you were there, and what was the buildup looking like?
Right. Well, in fact, there is a connection and similarity here that we have to the Kherson region, because both here in Kherson region and in Sumy region, we are dealing with the gray zone that is being exploited by the Russian military. In the Sumy region, they have been using drones to attack civilians, to attack all kinds of objects. For instance, I spoke to a priest whose car was attacked right in the border village in Kursk Oblast, and that's the Russian region, as we know, that is being now grabbed, if you will, by Ukrainians. And what immediately struck me is that that was a very wise move, because instead of waiting to see this gray zone being completely destroyed by the Russian weapons, artillery, MLRS, and drones, the Ukrainian army took the initiative and moved it. So this gray zone cannot be exploited to move further into the Ukrainian territory. Of course, it's much harder to do it here in the Kherson region because the front line is the Dnipro River, but it was easier to do it in Sumy Oblast going on to Kursk region.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Zarina Zabrisky, thank you very much for shedding light on these very important topics. We always appreciate having you on the show on Ukraine This Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
This week, Ukraine launched an offensive in the Kursk region of Russia, taking the fight to the aggressor's home turf. Russian troops are fighting to push Ukrainian forces out of the Kursk region in one of the largest cross-border incursions of this war. Russia initially reported that its forces has stopped the attack on its territory, but later admitted that the battles in the region were still ongoing.
Moscow's forces battle Ukrainian troops after they smashed through the border into Russia's Kursk region. It was an audacious attack on the world's biggest nuclear power and forced Russia to call in reserves. Russian officials said around 1,000 Ukrainian troops rammed through the border in the early hours of August 6th with tanks and armoured vehicles. They were covered in the air by swarms of drones and pounding artillery. Ukraine released drone footage said to show Russian border guards surrendering at the Sudzha border crossing point. Heavy fighting was reported near the town of Sudzha, where Russian natural gas flows into Ukraine, raising concerns about a possible sudden stop to transit flows to Europe. Kyiv has not commented directly on the action. Without mentioning Kursk, Ukraine's president said Russia had to deal with the consequences of the war it started.
Russia brought the war to our land, and it should feel what it has done. We strive to achieve our goals as soon as possible in peacetime, under just peace conditions, and it will happen.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken with the governor of Kursk and has cast the offensive as a major provocation. Officials have evacuated some 3,000 residents and declared a federal-level emergency. The battles come at a crucial time in the conflict. Kyiv is concerned that US support could weaken if Donald Trump wins November's presidential election. Trump has said he would end the war, and both Russia and Ukraine are keen to gain the strongest possible bargaining position on the battlefield.
And now joining me to discuss this latest offensive into the Kursk region is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief at the Kyiv Post. Hello, Bohdan, and thank you for joining me on Ukraine this week.
It's my pleasure. Nice to see you again.
Yes. Now, concerning, there's a lot of operational secrecy here about this operation that's currently ongoing. But I think we can discuss, first of all, a big question on many people's minds is what is the ultimate goal of this offensive, of this operation that is currently ongoing in Kursk?
Well, I think it's a very clever move, which has several levels. On the first level, it's a diversionary tactic to push Russian troops away from the pressure points that the Ukrainian forces are encountering, particularly in the Donbas region and around Kharkiv. So it's to take the pressure off these places where there is still very fierce fighting going on every day. Secondly, I think it's a question of a PR exercise, meaning it hits Putin's reputation, it sheds panic and dissatisfaction, shall we say, unhappiness amongst the Russian population, as we've seen. Those that are being evacuated are protesting that why weren't they defended? How could this happen? Where is our mighty, glorious Russian army, etc.? Putin looked very unhappy on TV yesterday when he had to explain that this situation, as he called it, note euphemistically, not an incursion, not war, not a special operation, but this situation. Even the choice of that euphemism meant that he was unsure how to present it, to concede that the Ukrainians had actually advanced into Russia proper. But thirdly, I think underlying it is another factor that is not taken into account so much, and that is that it gives Ukraine a sort of a bargaining chip, grabbing a piece of Russian territory for the moment, a territory which has some very important strategic elements on it. There is the very important gas pumping station, the main one through which the oil going to Eastern Europe or parts of it, Slovakia, Hungary, and Austria goes. So that apparently is in the hands of the Ukrainians already, or maybe threatened by them. We're unsure on the situation. And further afield, of course, is the nuclear power station in Kursk, which, if threatened or taken by the Ukrainians, again, is a bargaining chip to try and get the Russians to ease their pressure on the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant.
But that's assuming that the Ukrainians can actually hold the territory. Now, we don't know very much about exactly which areas they control and occupy. We know that they've made it about 35 kilometers in depth from the border. But now Russians are sending in reinforcements, and they are trying to get the Ukrainians out of there. I think the biggest risk at this point is that none of those units get cut off. And really, that again begs the question, can Ukraine actually hold the territory or a significant piece of territory?
The question is, for how long would it want to hold this territory? The damage is already done, as I've said, to the morale of the Russian side, to the image of its leadership, particularly the military leadership, and it's left Putin looking like, a naked emperor. If they have the pumping station, which I think some accounts say they already control or they have encircled, they don't really need to get to the nuclear power station. If they entrench themselves even within 20 kilometers or 15 kilometers, if they place their weapons, particularly anti-aircraft weapons, anti-missile weapons, they've already stopped the Russians from using air power. You've noticed in the last 2 or 3 days there have been no major attempts by the Russians to use their air force there, because the Russians have used, the Ukrainians have moved up their missile systems and heavy artillery. Remember also last night what happened. Russian supplies were rushed, military supplies and personnel, and were destroyed in one of the most embarrassing destructions and cases of scores of prisoners of war being taken. So that was a major blow for the Russians. They're doing the same today. And everybody knows about this. It's all over the Western press that the Russians are sending new columns there. So obviously Ukrainian intelligence knows, and artillery and drones are ready for tonight as well. So I think we will see this intense battling around this area for a few days. I don't think the Ukrainians necessarily want to stay there and have a permanent foothold on Russian territory. But the lesson will be drawn.
With this gas hub that you mentioned that controls the flow to, as you mentioned, the Slovakia, Hungary, etc., what do you think the end game is there? Do you think the Ukrainians want to take that out and destroy it?
I think so, because they've already imposed new sanctions on Gazprom. There is this feud going on between Hungary and Slovakia and Ukraine over the supply of oil. Note, maybe the Austrians were tipped off. They announced last week that they are pulling out of any dependence on Russian oil in the future. Interesting that announcement was made days before the Ukrainians went in there. So I think, there are things going on behind the scenes that we also don't know about. It's also weakens the Hungarian and Slovakian leverage that they're trying to impose on Ukraine.
Right. Now, concerning, if we look at the past, we saw the Russian Volunteer Corps, the Freedom of Russia Legion. They were primarily the actors in those last two offensives, if you will, into Russian territory. But if we look at the very last one, that was near Vovchansk. The Russians have come back across and leveled the city, completely destroyed it. Is there a risk that something similar could happen in Sumy when Ukrainians pull out of Kursk, that the Sumy region will also be a target for Russian forces?
It could happen. It depends how strong and how better organized the Russians are. Their tactic has been a kind of scorched earth policy in reverse, not as they retreat, but as they advance to kind of destroy, flatten cities behind them and as they advance. So that may well be on the cards, and that may well apply to Kharkiv if they ever get there. God prevent or forbid. So, but I don't think that the Ukrainians are, not aware of this, and this is why they're trying to push the Russians back as far as possible, and it creates an implicit buffer zone which can be controlled from afar by heavy artillery missiles. Remember also the F-16s are about to make their appearance. Perhaps one of the reasons why the Russians have been so hesitant in using air power in the Kursk region is because they know that they are suddenly vulnerable even to a handful of these F-16s. So it's going to take a little bit of time for the Russians to redeploy and decide where they can afford to weaken their ongoing offensives and to redeploy. What we've seen, in the Kursk region, is that the area was very underdefended. There's a Chechen unit that was helping the local militia and volunteers, and that was swept aside within hours. So really, they have to redeploy quite massively. And there's also the possibility that the Ukrainians might want to strike elsewhere, in the Belgorod region as well, which they've been hitting from the air.
Right. Meanwhile, the pressure, would you say that the pressure along the front, I mean, especially in some of those really hot spots, like in the Pokrovsk direction or near Chasiv Yar, is it likely that Russia's pulling forces from those particular hot spots to send to Kursk? How will do you think it'll influence the fighting there?
I think they will remove, and they already are beginning to remove forces, redeploy forces, maybe not necessarily from those key areas, but from elsewhere in Russia. But they will have to do that if they want to hold the line and also to maintain morale within Russia, within the armed forces and their image. This is the first time since World War II where Russia proper has been hit by another country, in this case defending its own territory. I mean, it's not really good for the image of a great Russia that, was second most powerful army in the world, and you should listen to us, and we have nuclear weapons, etc. And suddenly, their vulnerability and disorder is made very clear again.
It certainly is. One final question about General Syrsky. He's recently faced a bit of criticism. You think this is going to be kind of a make or break operation for him, the success of this tied in with his potential future as the commander of the armed forces?
Look, I think whatever criticism he's faced, I think that this initial success, and let's hope the Ukrainians can find a way of packaging that success and making it somehow sustainable. I think that that's worked in his favor. I think that the chap that should be worrying is Gerasimov, the chief of staff of the Russian army, because there has to be a fall guy, there has to be a scapegoat on the Russian side. I don't think that Putin is going to let anybody off lightly. He's been humiliated in public. He's been humiliated. I mean, look, did you see him on TV, the way he looked? This was not the oh so confident Putin that we've been used to, blustering and throwing his weight around.
Certainly. Well, Bohdan, Nahaylo, thank you very much for joining me on Ukraine this week. Your insight, absolutely fantastic. And of course, we'll be following these developments as they continue in the Kursk region. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
And that's all on this edition of Ukraine This Week. Join us next week for another summary of all the latest events from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and see you then.